Hi there, my name is Eric, and this is Chapter 4 of Photography for Birders and Other Wildlife Enthusiasts. This is about focus zones and shooting modes. There's different kinds of blur. There's subject focus, where your point of focus is out. Soft focus because of lens or distortions. Sometimes multi-purpose zoom lenses, you get pushed to the limit. They can be a little soft. Camera movement, shake. Long lenses, the longer the focal length, the more you get that. And subject movement. Subject moves and you get a blur. So I want to talk about depth of field for a little bit, which is the amount of focus front to back. And it's always perpendicular to the camera unless you've got something special going on with perspective control. Depth of field is affected by four things. It's the aperture, the focal length, the point of focus, and the size of the sensor. A wide depth of field, so more depth, has more in focus than a low or a narrow depth of field. Wildlife photos are usually done with long lenses and fast shutter speeds and wide open apertures, so that inevitably means narrow depth of field. It's just something that you have to work with, and it's important for focus to be as accurate as possible, given the fact that often the depth of field is literally only a couple of inches. This is a male ruddy duck. I shot at 600 millimeters on a APS-C sensor camera, so its relative was 900 millimeters. And again, shooting wide open, minimum depth of field, minimum aperture. Eagle, we were out kayaking in the Broken Islands. It was raining. I was shooting at 12 frames per second. I talk about that a little bit later. And this was one of the shots that turned out. Whenever you're shooting wildlife, sometimes the bird is not always nice and parallel to your frame. Instead, it's at a bit of an angle, which means you're going to get parts of it out of focus. You can see the tail feathers are starting to get out of focus. So I always make sure the bird's head is in focus. That's my first choice. And then after that, it goes on. If the bird is pretty much parallel to your film plane or plane of the sensor, then depth of field typically isn't a problem. So when you have good light, you can play with aperture. And the advantage of low aperture is that it helps to draw your eye to your point of focus. Stuff that's blurry, your eye tends to ignore. Now, if you want, you can get the same shot with a smaller aperture, more depth of field. You can see the difference there. The issue on there, of course, is going to be shutter speed. You can always improve that with ISO, but as we talked about in the last chapter, you want to find that balance. But sometimes if you shoot with a focal length that's not quite so long, so something in the 100 millimeter range, 150, sometimes you can get away with smaller apertures. This is another example. You can see here at f4.3 the bridge is out of focus. At f11 the bridge comes into focus. So you've got lots of choices on your camera. Generally there are kind of three ways to look at things. There's when your focus is achieved, there's where your focus point is, and then there's using manual focus. You do have autofocus with manual override possible. Not all lenses have that. Basically, you know that you've got an override because while you're pressing your shutter button and you're getting focus lock, even when it's locked, you can still turn a focus ring on the lens. That's called full-time manual override. So the where component of this, there are a number of choices. There's center focus. This is the one that I use most of the time by far. There is single point focus, but I can move it around. There's multi-zone focus, which I typically don't use unless I'm giving my camera to someone else and say go take pictures, and then I turn on the multi-zone focus. And there's 3D focus tracking, which we'll talk about in a bit. This is a photograph of an Anna's hummingbird I took in my backyard. center point focusing. You can see where the little cross is there. That's where center point would be on the camera lens, and if you tried to take a picture, it wouldn't work out. So here, the deal is you press your shutter button halfway down and lock focus. So I would put the center of the camera on the bird, halfway down, lock focus. After that point, I'm gonna reframe the image, and so when I reframe the image, I get the image that I want with the focus that I want, and then I press the shutter down the rest of the way. Now, the reason I don't like autofocus, multi-zone autofocus, has got to do right here. If you look over here, you can see these branches and bushes parts are out of focus. Chances are very good that the camera would lock on that, and you would end up with a bird that's out of focus. So not an option that's great. Center point focus. If you use center point focus but you forget to lock and reframe, you're going to get stuff like this, where you get background in focus but not your subject. Instead, what you want to do is you want to lock on your subject, reframe, and get your picture. Okay, so this is an example of a camera that has 9 focus zones in it, and if you're using autofocus, which one is going to be locked on, right? I mean, it'd be nice if it was the top center one, but probably not. So for when I'm shooting stationary subjects, I always prefer center point focusing. First of all, the center of the camera for focus is by far the best. I mean, there's other focus areas in the camera, but they don't have the same level of accuracy as the center point does. So that's another good reason to use that. If you want to move your focus point, you can do that. Sometimes there is a focus choice that you have to make in your menu or on a focus button, and you would use your navigation controls on the back to control exactly where that is. If you've got a touch screen, sometimes you can just touch that. The nice thing about that is you can move your focus zone around, and then you don't have to reframe. You take your picture. If you're using continuous focus and this particular thing, this is a nice combination. So you can see here I've got the focus zone on the far left top selected, and I would put that where it's most important to focus, which is head, usually eye certainly, and then I can take the picture without reframing. Always pay attention to where your focus point is. Very important, hugely important that you do that. I'd also use manual focus. Now, the problem with manual focus, of course, is that if your bird's moving, trying to focus manually is insane. The advantage of it, though, is that you can switch from autofocus to manual focus. Now, this is something I quite like to do. If I find a place where I know the bird is going to be, nesting sites are good. Feeding sites, any place where you know the bird is going to be, what I'll do is I'll set it up on a tripod and I'll lock focus on that point, and then I'll wait, and then the bird will show up. And so inevitably what's going to happen is I'm going to focus on that spot and go to manual and do that. Now, this is another trick. A lot of people don't know this. I've taught courses for probably 30 years now, and I get a lot of, wow, I didn't know you could do that kind of thoughts. This is on your manual focus. One of the comments is, well, it's hard to tell that it's really in focus. I mean, how do I really know? So if you have live view, and if you've got any kind of camera that's reasonably new, you should be able to use live view on the monitor. Go to manual focus, you turn live view on, and you take a look at what it is that you're looking at. Now, at this moment, what you do is you use your zoom buttons, your zoom control, and you zoom in. And what will happen is that you don't actually physically zoom in. What happens is that the monitor zooms in. So this has to be a DSLR type camera. If you're using a camera with like a compact, it's not going to work. But DSLR, what you would do is you would use your plus minus buttons there. You can see on the back I have the magnify image one over here selected. You can see that right there. Okay, so you would use this button or this button, not the zoom button, which was going to be on a different type of camera. And in manual focus, you push that and you get closer, and so you can see how sharp your focus is. The when question, there are 3 choices on this. There's the single point mode, there's continuous focus mode, and there's auto. So single is one I use most of the time. I do use continuous occasionally, but if I'm going continuous, chances are as I'm using 3D. If I want to go to 3D focusing, I have to turn it to the autofocus first, and then I would use the other selection to find 3D focus tracking. These are all examples of 3D focus tracking. I have some more coming up. You can see here on a 3-point camera where it's got 3 different focus zones, that being able to select the one that you want is a little thin. This is 9-point, a little better, but still somewhat limited. This one here has got 15 points. Here we've got 45 points, and so this would be good for doing 3D focus tracking. Lots of points to choose from. This one here is 243, and you can see that it would be amazing for focus tracking. So one of the questions you might have is that right? 243, is that even possible? I can assure you that some cameras have many more than 243 focus zones. This is of course on the continuous autofocus, and so you could track that way. If you've got nothing in front, it's usually not a bad problem. 3D tracking, I've talked about that in my last show, but I'll talk about this one a little bit. There's two aspects to it. There's the camera aspect and the lens aspect. Camera aspect, a higher end camera is going to have faster processing power. It's going to have more focusing zones. It's going to be able to track better. Lens requirement, you're going to want a lens that has got internal focus. A faster, higher quality lens is going to do a much better job. When you really magnify, it's going to be hard to actually keep track of it. If you actually pull the magnification back a little bit, sometimes you can be more successful. Then you're going to have to take your image and crop it. These are example of 3D focus tracking shots that I've taken. Shooting modes, we'll just talk about this briefly. Shooting modes have to do with when you push your button and hang on to it, push the shutter button, what happens? Do you get a single shot? Do you get continuous? Do you have more than one continuous option? Self-timer and remote possibilities. Generally, when I'm taking pictures, I'm using single. And the reason is I only want to take one image at a time, not 2 or 3 or 4. Some cameras will take 12 or 14 images per second, and so instead of getting 1 image, you get 5 of the same thing, which is a little much. It also helps you to really pay attention to what it is that you're doing. You don't need to have identical images. These are examples with single focus using push and hold and lock and reframe where necessary. These are all pretty standard. Continuous high shooting mode, your subject's on the move. If I'm panning, I do this. I will turn vibration mitigation off, which is when you're doing your 3D focus tracking. You want to turn off vibration mitigation or turn it to active. We talked about that in the last chapter. Okay. If you're using single, you can do that, but you got to press release. This is one of the things I mentioned that I would show you later. So this was a whole series of photographs I took while kayaking in the Broken Islands using continuous focus and at the same time using focus, single point focus. And then I just took as many images as I could, 12 frames per second. This is over 2 second time period. The thing with taking continuous shots is how big is your memory buffer. If you're shooting RAW versus JPEG, that's a huge thing. What's the speed of your memory card? Faster ones allow you to shoot usually a few more. I like to buy the U3 cards. They give me much better performance, and sometimes you can find a pretty good deal on them. These are all continuous shooting mode examples. I'm just going to go through these quickly. Okay, well, thanks for watching. And my name is Eric. Feel free to contact me and take a look for my book. Thanks again.